30,000 years ago, people began migrating from Eurasia across a massive land bridge known as Bering. As the Ice Age ended, that bridge was swallowed by the rising ocean, physically isolating a vast landmass from the rest of the globe. The early inhabitants pushed deeper into the Americas. Over thousands of years, they formed complex civilizations, like the Adena and Mississippian cultures, that developed in total separation from the Eastern Hemisphere. This map shows the sudden end to that isolation. Starting in 1492, Spanish, French, and English ships sail west. They land on an already inhabited continent and establish colonies and trade posts to extract resources for their empires. If we look closely at the eastern seaboard, we see where English colonists settled heavily in the 17th century. To drive economic growth through commercial agriculture, these settlements imported enslaved African labor at a massive scale. By the 1770s, enslaved people made up a fifth of the total colonial population. The continent is now a site of friction between global empires, indigenous nations, and a colonial population pinned to the coast. These conflicting claims leave the existing political boundaries increasingly unstable. The American colonies relied on the British military for protection against French and Spanish powers, but that military support was expensive, leaving Britain with a massive war debt that they attempted to pay by taxing the colonies directly, without colonial representation in Parliament. The colonists refused to pay. Resistance culminated in the 1773 Boston Tea Party, which Parliament met with strict coercive acts that stripped Massachusetts of its right to self-government. Rather than submit, leaders from all 13 colonies unified their efforts to organize a formal armed rebellion in 1775. General George Washington transformed a volunteer force into a disciplined Republican army. By securing a military alliance with France, the colonies balanced the naval forces against Britain and forced a total surrender by 1783. The United States secured its independence. With that victory, the new nation claimed the immediate right to push its borders westward into contested lands past the Appalachian Mountains. In 1803, the U.S. bought the Louisiana Territory for $15 million, doubling its size. But this sudden growth worsened internal fractures. The nation became paralyzed over the spread of slavery, creating a stark ideological divide between North and South. The crisis reached a breaking point in 1860 with the election of Abraham Lincoln. His platform supported banning slavery in all new territories, a stance which ultimately served as the final catalyst for Southern secession. War broke out in April 1861. For the next 4 years, the country was locked in a conflict of massive industrial scale to decide if the United States would remain a single, unified nation. The Union victory forcefully ended slavery and established a centralized federal authority with the power to manage the entire continent. In the late 19th century, the United States experienced a massive economic explosion. New industries and a surge in infrastructure development turned the country into a rising industrial power. This booming economy pushed American interests far beyond its own borders. By 1898, the nation's military capacity was directed outward in the Spanish-American War. Following a series of rapid victories, the United States acquired the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam. The nation had officially stepped onto the world stage as an imperial power. But that rise was met by a devastating domestic shock. The Great Depression began in 1929, causing a total collapse of the economy and leaving millions in lines for basic food supplies. This cycle of expansion and collapse created a massive industrial giant operating below capacity, waiting for a catalyst to restart its global footprint. That catalyst arrived on December 7, 1941. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor forced a neutral United States into World War II. The nation activated its entire industrial base for the war effort. The U.S. military fought across the Pacific and Europe simultaneously, while serving as the primary supply chain for the Allies, providing the vehicles, food, and equipment that dictated the pace of the war. By 1945, Germany and Japan had both surrendered. This left the United States and the Soviet Union as the only two rival superpowers remaining in the global aftermath. This began the Cold War. Rather than direct conflict, the two powers engaged in a global arms race and funded proxy wars in Korea and Vietnam to stop the spread of communism. While the nation asserted its authority globally, it faced a crisis of rights at home. In the 1960s, African Americans and racial minorities organized massive civil rights movements to demand basic voting freedoms and an end to segregation. True superpower status meant that the United States had to manage catastrophic global stakes while navigating severe internal social revolutions. The Cold War order ended abruptly with the collapse of the Soviet Union, leaving the United States as the world's primary power. But the threats of the 21st century shifted toward borderless, asymmetrical conflicts. The September 11th attacks led to warfare in Iraq and Afghanistan. Global interconnectedness also created shared vulnerabilities. In 2008, a severe economic crisis started in the U.S. housing market and immediately shook financial systems across the globe. The United States began as a series of fragile outposts along the Atlantic. In 3 centuries, it transitioned into a global power that now influences trade routes, military alliances, and financial stability across every continent.